Over the summer, a lot has been going on with the war in Ukraine, but not necessarily specifically in Ukraine. More, you could argue, is happening outside of the country because of the diplomatic flurry of activity from Alaska to Beijing to Jiaxing, and of course, Europe as well, but also inside Russia. More and more oil refineries seem to explode, and now the Ukrainians have a significant new piece of kit in their arsenal, the Flamingo missile.
A lot happened in Russia, which wasn't so brilliant for Putin, for Russians. Meetings with Ukraine, well, there were 3 meetings altogether, and they were initiated by Putin calling. Turned out to be true. Yeah, Russia is not isolated any longer. Russia is invited to the United States.
This is the Global Gambit.
Putin is for all his pomp and circumstance, shaking hands with Modi, and he's got his friends or colleagues elsewhere. It's definitely not honky-dory in Russia. And someone who knows what's going on inside Russia better than most is Konstantin Samoilov, or the host of Inside Russia's YouTube channel. And we've had him on the channel numerous times. You know who he is. He's awesome, right? So Konstantin, lovely to have you on. We're going to have a 2-part conversation, I think. First half, I want to hear your thoughts about Putin, Trump, Alaska, Beijing, all that sort of stuff. And then the second half, let's talk about what's going on in Russia more. Where to start, really? What do you think about the global image and perception of Putin right now? He had a good August. I think for people, for him, he had a good August, right? Or you disagree?
First of all, thank you for inviting me again. It's a pleasure to be here, to have a conversation with you. Yes, a lot have happened since our last conversation. I believe it was early July. And then we were going to meet at late August and discuss, and here we are. Putin certainly did have an excellent, wonderful, brilliant August. Winning August, I should say. A lot happened in Russia, which wasn't so brilliant for Putin, for Russians. But a lot happened outside Russia, which actually was brilliant for Putin and for, image of Russia, not in the West, but everywhere else. So yes, Putin did have a fantastic August.
Well, okay, let's break that down a little bit more. What particularly do you think was the biggest benefits for him? A lot of people emphasize that, Trump was just going to be played by him, and clearly, the two were very chummy. But, what did Putin really get out of Alaska, in your opinion?
If you recall our last conversation, I emphasized that Putin claimed the victory over Ukraine. He claimed the victory over the West, which is even more important. And that victory was given to him by Donald Trump when he started appeasing Putin. In February, he started calling him a good guy, the guy, strong guy, and all these things, and the guy who's going to be deciding the fate of the Middle East. And Trump called multiple times. He sent his envoys to Moscow. He received an envoy from Russia. He treated well, and my point was that was the victory for Vladimir Putin, domestic victory. And he did claim the victory indeed on the May 9th parade. Huge celebration. 27 leaders of different countries showed up, shook his hands, and Putin was back into the game. He was back at the world stage. If you recall 3.5 years ago when Russia attacked and Putin claimed the responsibility by saying, hey, I made that decision to invade Ukraine, he instantly became the pariah in the entire world, right? Remember the incredible support Ukraine enjoyed. Everywhere, in the media, in large cities all over the world, there were gatherings, meetings to support Ukraine. There was a lot of fundraising going on, and there was lots of, you remember that in 2022, early March, April, May. Things are very different now. Putin is not pariah any longer. World leaders, including European leaders, travel to Moscow, friends with him, shake his hand, have meals with him, discuss things with him. So he's clearly one of the world leaders again. And that happened on May 9th. And then he, shortly after, he tried to be the peacemaker for the entire world. He called for meetings with Ukraine. Well, there were 3 meetings altogether. And they were initiated by Putin calling. So he humiliated Donald Trump by leaving him outside the meetings. Okay, just Putin's representatives flew to Istanbul and met with the Ukrainians. And that was another victory in the eyes of the world. And of course, early August, there was, I don't even know how to call that event. There was earthquake on the world's geopolitical scene. It was a very unexpected event. And my sources say that in the Kremlin, they actually had not expected that gift that was given to Putin. Okay, he was invited to visit the United States of America officially. So he made an official visit, and I mean, he got elevated. He's basically back to where he fell off from in February of 2020. He's one of the world's strongest leaders. Travels to the USA, pulling the shots, not in the West, but a lot of people outside the West, because the world is a big place, right? And it's not just the West. They perceive him exactly that way that I just described you. And inside Russia, boy.
I want to ask you on that specific point, though, Konstantin, because obviously he was in Alaska. He's having handshakes and pats on the back with Trump. But then in SCO, him and Modi especially, right? Modi putting, always good to see my friend President Putin. And I think a very almost tongue-in-cheek sort of optic, because Trump and Putin shared a limo, right? But there was no picture inside the limo. And so what does President Modi do? Prime Minister Modi? He puts a picture of him with President Putin in his limo on X, of the two of them sitting side by side, right? This is such a good optical win for Putin, isn't it? India's really unwilling to take sides, which historically we know they won't. But, quite clearly they're making very clear that they're not happy with how America's treating them, and they're going to be steadfast with their historical partner and ally friend, Russia.
Well, he continues to be victorious. And he claimed another victory in the eyes of many, many people. I don't think that was a victory a couple of days ago in Tianjin, but in the eyes of a lot of people in the world, that certainly appears that way. And yes, you're right. There are a lot of optics. Love that word. It's kind of like new. Well, everyone starts talking about it. A few words appear here and there. Now it's the optics. The optics are absolutely great for Vladimir Putin. And yes, he did ride in the limo with Modi, pictures, handshakes, and another win. But let's talk about true situation. Is it a win for Putin inside Russia, really? I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I've been using the word optics for years. If you know international relations, optics, imagery, perception, whatever word you want to use, that are all sort of synonymous, is very powerful. But to your point, I want to get into the details of Russia specific in the second half. But about all of this is great on paper, right? It looks great for Putin as world leader, relevant, legitimized in the eyes of his people. But what actually substantively does it do? It doesn't really do much, does it? It just makes him look great, and Russia is involved. But other than that, how does it improve the situation on the battlefield for the Russians?
On the battlefield, it doesn't improve the situation in any way. But in the eyes of the Africans, the Brazilians, the people of Latin America, where the Middle East, it certainly has improved his image a lot, a great deal. The RT, Russia Today, is the foreign hand of Russian propaganda, has been spreading and growing its influence in the Spanish-speaking world, in Arabic-speaking world. You better believe it. They're very actively selling this picture of Putin, the victor, in those countries. That's how these events influence, not people in the West, but outside the West, in the rest of the world. I've heard lots of opinions from non-English speakers. Look at Putin. He's strong, big leader, cares about Russia, cares about the image of Russia, and so forth. They don't know much about what's going on in Ukraine, or sometimes they have very broken understanding of what's truly happening there. But they certainly do see the great image of Vladimir Putin that's been strengthened recently.
Yeah, and just to return to Alaska, actually, because come to think of it, you know, a lot of people were saying that this was a win for Putin because he was framing it as a sort of, he's been pushing in Russian state TV the idea that Alaska is obviously historically Russia's and that it was never legitimized in the sale to America and therefore it should be given back, or whatever sort of rather crazy narrative. So what about the fact that he was invited to be on American soil, but that was once Russian, right? You know, that just falls into his narrative framing even for more, right?
Well, I have never heard anyone in Russia saying that Alaska was sold by Russia to the USA illegitimately and we need to claim it back. Not once. Okay. They do say that Alaska historically was Russian land, and it was sold not too long ago, by the way, 150 years ago. A lot of Russians, and propaganda certainly picks it up. A lot of Russians have warm feelings towards Alaska, but no one thinks it's historic Russian land that needs to be, taken back, claimed back, or whatever, bought back or annexed. They used this card a lot when Putin was visiting. I covered the visit in it, but it was incredible. It was something that I did not expect. No one expected. And people in the Kremlin did not expect it either. I know, I have my sources. Totally unexpected. As a gift, like present gift. Putin was invited by the world's strongest country, the strongest leader. Donald Trump is certainly the name that everyone in the world knows. He was graciously invited, and some Russian propaganda even sold it as Trump was begging Putin to come to America and start normalizing relations. And in the USA, it's funny because in the West and in Russia, it almost seemed like it was two different events. Because in the West, it was the peace summit. Obviously, it was everywhere when Putin came to Alaska, peace summit, science, press conference of the peace summit and so forth. In Russia, it was nothing to do with peace or war in Ukraine. It was an official visit of Russian president to the United States of America with the purpose to start normalizing relations with the USA. And the USA made the very first step, invited. Moreover, the USA gave Russian president royal treatment. It organized air parade in his honor. The American army officers were saluting Russian president. That's the guy who is, by the way, wanted by the Hague court, criminal court, okay? So those officers who are paid by American taxpayers, they saluted and they honored Vladimir Putin on their own land. Russian journalists, a lot of them had been banned from entering the United States. They were given visas, visitors' visas, 500 of them. Normally, they traveled to the USA. They were allowed to stay there for a couple of days, and they prepared incredible amount of reports. They made it look like as if Alaska is truly a Russian land, as if Russian is like spoken throughout Alaska. I think they found every single person in Alaska who speaks Russian, because there are some who, bilingual, and I take it like Russian is like hobby for them.
Yeah.
Okay? And then they made it look like most of Alaskans are half Russian. Okay, you should have seen it. It was quite a show.
Well,
and this is how they sold it. But Americans, they expected completely different. They expected a short visit to make a deal on a ceasefire and to lay out roadmap to peace in Ukraine. Okay, and then once Putin was over, basically he was kicked out. His visit was cut short. And he wasn't even offered a dinner like they had planned on. So when he left, everyone was wondering, why did Putin come to the United States if he didn't say anything about peace whatsoever? He didn't want peace, obviously. He didn't want ceasefire. And they're all wondering. I have another interview coming up today. This is one I'm going to talk about in the United States. But in Russia, it's a different story. In Russia, Putin, the victor, the Tsar, Vladimir the Great, he conquered America. He won. He went there, came back, relations normalized, and life goes on, and Russia is not pariah any longer. The United States invites the Russian president. You see how different this visit looked like in the West and in Russia? So Putin totally won.
Yeah, but obviously, Konstantin, it's very clear that the majority of Alaskans are actually, covert Russians. They know the language inside and out. Clearly, obviously, that's the truth. I'm joking here, guys, but there are maybe some people who have a hobby of speaking Russian, because one of the things that I find most fascinating about the relationship of Russia to America is the islands between Alaska and East Russia, that they often swap, they will change the flags round. They have a particular sort of routine that they do on I think half a year basis or something rather silly. And it's little known facts like that I found quite interesting. But yeah, no, obviously Putin has found sort of some quite bizarre, but still you have to acknowledge the rather impressive ways that they're able to really spin things, even the most bizarre of things, although Trump hasn't not exactly made it easy for them. And so what do you think that does for Putin's ability to command sort of, that he is a legitimate head of state? He's steadfast, he's consistent, he's reliable, a bit like what President Xi's been doing in the past few days compared to Trump's ranting and raging and reckless foreign policy, right? Putin is able to sort of illustrate that he is respected even amongst the most powerful nation in the world, right?
Inside Russia, you just described what happened. He proved himself. For 3 years, he was saying, look, the Western sanctions, they're not working. We're circumventing, we're becoming stronger, and sooner or later, everything will get back to normal. And of course, it was bogus. But it turned out to be true. He did fly. He was invited to visit the United States of America with an official visit. He didn't come there in and out type of thing, with just himself and a couple advisors. No, he came with big fanfare. It was a properly organized state visit. That's what a lot of people don't understand. It wasn't peace summit. That was a state visit, okay? And then he returned, and Russians believed in him. Everything that he promised turned out to be true. Yeah, Russia is not isolated any longer. Russia is invited to the United States. Putin, U.S. president, treats him royally, creates an air parade in his honor, military parade, right? Then Putin is invited to the China Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting, not just as a small guest. No, he's one of the founding fathers. He's right next to Xi. He is victor again. So he is enjoying great support in Russia. He's increased trust among people. And what I think the most important for him is he has showed those wolves around him, okay, that he's the strongest wolf in the pack still. Because once he starts, his grab starts weakening, what happens? All the wolves gonna take on him. But he showed them who is the boss, and he is still the boss in Russia. He is the one who flies to Alaska and flies back safely. He is the one greeted by Donald Trump, grabbed by hand and invited into his limousine, the beast, He is the one who flies to China and accepted as the leader, shakes hands with Xi. So that's a subliminal message to those strong men in Russia. Underneath him, his servants, the Praetorians. Don't you even dare to think about it. I think that's what the biggest victory for him is.
Yeah, no.
He's gonna grab on his power for quite some longer.
Yeah, no, for sure. He is the master of being able to retain power in ways that so many other people have aspired to. Bolsonaro, the Erdogans, the Vucic.
KGB agent.
I know. It's part of his DNA. But what do you think about his peace proposals? Right, these territorial concessions. That if what did you think of his efforts to try to offer something to Trump. I was very worried at one point that the Alaska summit could actually be worse than it was, because it was basically a nothing burger. But, the two sides could have easily done a backdoor deal and just completely left Ukraine and Europe more broadly out of it and, sort of carved up Ukraine or something. So take me through your thoughts about his concessions.
I didn't quite understand the question. What efforts? What peace proposal? There were no efforts. There was no peace proposal whatsoever. Putin created a picture, an image, an optic of him being a peacemaker by inviting the Ukrainian team to meet with the Russian team in Istanbul right after May 9th parade, a couple days later. So he wanted to appear as the peacemaker. But there was no proposal, efforts. He didn't make any efforts. He's just playing his game. In the United States, when he visited Alaska, what proposal? I don't know of any.
Well, yeah.
You mean that he's saying, "Oh, you give us everything that all the Ukrainian land we are now at, and then some, and we'll freeze the front line at that, and that's it." I don't find it a proposal. That's nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, you're taking me too literally there. Obviously, it's not meant to be taken on genuine intent. It's Vladimir Putin. But the point is that there was a lot of fanfare around the Alaska summit as being the potential breakthrough for something. Now, in my opinion, it very much resembled when Trump hosted Kim Jong-un of North Korea and the South Korean equivalent, be it in the Koreas themselves, when they shook hands across the DMZ, but nothing actually happened. It was just a photo op for both here, Trump and the others, but nothing came of it. No actual policy or shifts in anything like that. So obviously it's not genuine, but like Putin's suggestions of what he will happily stop the war along the current line of contact, but he gets also to keep the territories that he currently controls, right? It's not really much of a negotiating position. So that was more the point I was talking about.
Yeah, that's not a proposal. That's just something he threw up in the air. And obviously, I think the USA and Russia cannot make a deal behind Ukraine's back, because, I mean, Ukrainians have to agree on the terms of such proposal or such deal. And how can you make a deal without Ukrainians? They're still there. They're very brave, strong people. They're still fighting. Yes, they die, but they're still fighting, defending their land. And they're not gonna just cease doing that. That they will continue.
Yeah.
I don't think any proposal can be made behind their backs.
So what do you think Putin can actually get out of these diplomatic multilateral organizations, right? He was right there with Xi and Kim Jong-un on yesterday. But do you think that relationship has its limits? Because ultimately, I think China sees Russia more as a means to an end than a long-time ally, because, well, they don't, I think, welcome the Russians and the North Koreans getting closer, put it that way. So how do you think Putin views that relationship? He's fully indebted, I think, to Xi Jinping at this point. Or you think he does have some wiggle room?
No, it doesn't. He is definitely on hook by China, and he needed to speak to Xi Jinping and to Modi even more so, because obviously there are two countries that are still dealing with Russia, India and China, and they're the biggest importers of Russian oil. 1.5 million barrels per day goes to India, and 1 million barrels goes to China. So, if India stops buying, and there are signs that India is slowing down buying Russian oil, that's a big problem. So Putin had a lot to discuss. Obviously, he had to discuss the gas deal with Xi Jinping, Power of Siberia too, and I think other smaller projects as well. And he did.
I guess as we sort of, move towards more of the Russia-specific part of the conversation, as a final point on the broader international engagements, what do you think Putin's going to do? What do you think we can expect diplomatically for the rest of this year? Any predictions you want to make?
Now, what happens in Alaska was totally unpredicted and unpredictable. Something like that. Anything is possible now. But my bet is that things will slow down for the rest of the year. He has done a lot recently. He has traveled a lot, and he's going to be trying to get benefits out of his travels and out of his meetings. Putin is facing a big problem inside Russia, and I think the best thing he's got out of this very eventful summer is that his grip on Russia is not weakening. He's still hanging on to his power. He'll be doing everything possible to continue hanging on to his power. There isn't much he can do in terms of international politics, diplomacy. There's not much space. I think it's going to be quiet, and then we'll see towards the end of the year.
Okay, well, he'll give his end of year address towards the Russian people, which is always 12 hours or something. He's always sitting on that stage for far too long. We have to stare at his stupid face all that time. Anyway, my professional analysis aside, everybody, that's the end of part 1 with Konstantin. We will be back with part 2, where we talk much more about inside Russia. So do come back.